Welcome back to Variant Quran. I'm Daniel Brubaker. Well, what does an encounter between Muhammad and a Christian monk in his youth have to do with the delivery and transmission of the Quran? We're going to talk about that today. If you stick around to the end, we're going to go through a lot of material and I'm going to give you some of my opinions. Well, I received a question, a very good question from a viewer this week. The viewer is Valentin Tomberg. And he says, "Hello, Dr. Brubaker. Thank you for your precious postings. May I ask you if you ever heard of the book, The Legend of Sergius Bahira, Eastern Christian Apologetics and Apocalyptic in Response to Islam? If so, what kind of impact could this legend have had on the development of the Islamic tradition, in your opinion? I would be grateful if you could answer me." And so I did give an answer to Valentin. It is a good question. There is a lot to unpack here, and in fact, what he refers to is going to be the topic of the video today. So before I begin, and I'm going to show you some books and talk about this a bit further, I will tell you what I responded to Valentin in my own response in the comments section. I wrote, "Dear Valentin, yes, it is a Brill book by Barbara Rugema, 2009. It's actually the book that resulted from her doctoral dissertation, and I have it in my library. In addition to substantive discussion of the accounts, their history, and their contents, the book contains 4 recensions of the account of this Christian monk, East Syriac, West Syriac, and 2 Arabic. As to what impact it had on the development of Islamic tradition, it is something about which I'm not prepared to make an opinion yet. Bahira appears, of course, in the biography of Muhammad, written by Ibn Ishaq, recension by the recension of Ibn Hisham. But even this was written more than 150 years after the reported life of Muhammad. This would have been plenty of time for the development of supporting narratives and the entry of details not rooted in history, but serving an apologetic or polemic purpose. Bahira himself, a Christian monk who recognizes Muhammad as a prophet and conveniently reads him into the biblical text, for example, as the Paraclete, is clearly a candidate for such. This deserves obviously much more discussion. I'm not sure where it takes us with respect to the topic of this channel, except for the allegation in the text of the accounts that Bahira taught Muhammad the Quran. We're going to talk about that in a minute. The interesting thing is that Bahira in these accounts both confirms Muhammad as a prophet and also diminishes him by making Bahira the true writer of the Quran. In other words, it gives with one hand and takes away with the other. Finally, when one looks at Bahira's vision in these accounts, it does not, to me, ring true when compared, for example, with the very special visions of Ezekiel in chapter 1, Daniel chapter 7, and John in Revelation 1 and following, after which this vision of Bahira appears to be modeled. So a ton of stuff to unpack, but certainly very interesting. A great question. Thank you." All right, so that was my answer to Valentin. The book to which he is referring, I do have on my shelf. It is this one here, The Legend of Sergius Bahira by Barbara Rugema. It is a Brill book. It is, as the Brill books are, an expensive volume. I picked it up a number of years ago at a conference where they sometimes offer these at something of a discount, although not really enough of a discount. But it is, the book contains material that is very valuable, including the actual Syriac text of the East and West Syriac recensions of this story about Bahira the monk, which we're going to talk about in a minute. I'm going to tell you the content of it. And it also has the 2 Arabic recensions of that story, along with translations in every case. Plus, at the beginning of the book, it has discussion of the matter as well. So who was Bahira? Bahira appears in the earliest report of the history of the life of Muhammad. And here it is in translation by Alfred Guillaume, 1955, Oxford. I may have shown you this before. This is a nearly 900, just over 800 page book. In the English translation, it goes from the prehistory of Muhammad's life, and it goes right on up through his death and shortly thereafter. It is, in fact, aside from the Hadith literature, but it was written about about a century and a half after the death of Muhammad, written down, and we have it not in the original that Ibn Ishaq wrote, but we have it in the version that is transmitted to us by Ibn Hisham, who was a generation beyond him. So most of the information that we have about the life of Muhammad comes from this book, and it's a heavy read, but if you want to really get it straight, as the idiom says, from the horse's mouth, if you want to get the original source, it is good to read this book. Here it is, of course, a translation from the Arabic, so here is an Arabic edition of the Sirah itself, and this is available. If you are an Arabic speaker and want to read it in the Arabic, you can look at it there, and this is only one edition. I'm sure that other editions exist. So today, and before I get into the story of Bahira himself, obviously, as you can imagine, there are many biographies of Muhammad that are more modern, and they come from a variety of different perspectives, and they tell the story in somewhat of a more accessible way. The one that I just showed you is very heavy with content. Sometimes it's difficult to navigate because it's technical, lots of details and so forth. And sometimes when a regular reader wants to get the main story, it's people tell stories in different ways, and so other people have told the life of Muhammad in different ways over the years. And so here I have some of them from my library. This is Muhammad Haikal, Life of Muhammad. Just to show you some examples of biographies of Muhammad, you have Martin Ling's. Martin Ling's, I believe, is a convert to Islam, a Western convert to Islam. This is the one, the Sirah of the Final Prophet. Sirah means biography. This is from Hassan al-Banna, of one of the founders of the Muslim Brotherhood. As you can imagine, these are coming and emphasizing different things. There is the very famous 23 years, Bistose Sal, in Persian, Farsi, the biography of Muhammad, just focusing on his 23 years after receiving the revelations. And there's the English translation, that's the book by Ali Dashti, very famous biography of Muhammad. There is another one that was won an award, another modern biography of Muhammad. That when was this made? Let's see. Oh, let's see. I don't know the publication date of that. Actually, I should know that. And then there are other perspectives. So, for example, this is the one. There's a Sufi biography of Muhammad. So it emphasizes certain things about his life that align with the Sufi perspective. So, so those are some of the probably Muslim perspectives on the life of Muhammad. And then, of course, you have Western scholarship has looked at Muhammad's life as well. There's Michael Cook's little Oxford biography of Muhammad, summary of that. You have Muhammad at Mecca, which is Montgomery Watt's analysis of the, not really telling of the biography, but it does focus on Muhammad's time at Mecca in his earlier period of his life. There's the French Maxime Rodinson, his biography of Muhammad there. Sorry, there's the other one by Montgomery Watt, Muhammad, Prophet and Statesman. And then there's Tor Andre, Muhammad, the man and his faith. So those are just a few. There are hundreds of different biographies, many of them modern, of the life of Muhammad. Now, one thing that all of these, I'm sorry, not all of them, I think, but most of them have in common is the telling of the story of Bahira the monk. And it appears prominently because it serves and I checked some of these that I just showed you just this morning and located the telling of the story of Bahira. It happened, and now you may be wondering what it was that happened. So it's told in the biography of Ibn Hisham that Ibn Ishaq through Ibn Hisham, that when Muhammad was about 12 years old, oops, oh no, where was it? Yeah. So on page 79 and 80 through 81 of this edition, in case you have it and want to reference it, it tells the story of Bahira. And the story goes like this. When Muhammad was a youth, and some of the other biographies say about 12 years old. I'm not sure if it says 12 years old in the biography itself. Yeah, it doesn't say his age, but the others have sort of triangulated what his age, and it appears that tradition says that Muhammad was about 12. Abu Talib, his uncle, would go on these trading journeys up to Syria, and on this particular trip, Muhammad wanted to go along and wound up going along with him. Along the way, they would stop at, one of their stopping points was near the cell of a monk, a Christian monk named Bahira. Now, Bahira had not taken note of them on previous trips, but on this particular trip, he invites them all in to have a meal with him. And they noted this as an unusual situation because he had never really taken that much interest in them before. And as it's told in the Sirah, what had happened preceding their arrival is he had seen in the distance the caravan approaching, and he saw a cloud over the head of Muhammad. Let me just read you the portion of that. While he was in his cell, he saw the apostle of God in the caravan when they approached, with a cloud overshadowing him among the people. Then they came and stopped in the shadow of a tree near the monk. He looked at the cloud when it overshadowed the tree, and its branches were bending and drooping over the apostle of God until he was in the shadow beneath it. When Bahira saw that, he came out of his cell and sent word to them, saying, I have prepared food for you, O men of Quraysh, and I should like you all to come, both great and small, bond and free. And so they all come to the meal, but of course, as the story goes, they leave the young Muhammad to guard the baggage, and Bahira looks at the group gathered before him and does not see the one who he had earlier recognized as being the apostle of God with the cloud over his head, and he asks them about it. Is there anybody else? And of course they go and get him and bring him in, at which point he pronounces his future that he had foreseen, and he checks the body of Muhammad. He looks between his shoulders and sees the mark of prophethood between his shoulders, something that apparently he had noted in one of his books that he had in his cell. And this is the confirmation of Muhammad's future. So a couple things about this. The first thing, one of the things that I noted when I first read this many years ago was its similarity to the account of when Jesse goes to anoint David king over Israel, and that is found in 1 Samuel. Yeah, 1 Samuel 16. And the story is very similar in many respects. Samuel goes and he calls Jesse, and Jesse calls out all his sons, but he leaves David, the youngest, who's tending the sheep. And Samuel passes by each one of the various sons of Jesse and does not recognize any of them as being the one whom God had anointed. And so then they call out the youngest son, and sure enough, it's him Samuel anoints him king over Israel. So interesting. Don't know what we make of that, but I did notice that similarity there. Now, what purpose does this account serve in the Sirah? Well, the first thing, obviously, is that you have independent confirmation here by a Christian, by somebody who's in possession of the earlier scriptures, and not only that, but somebody who is a monk who's dedicated his life to, presumably, to renouncing the world and to study of the scriptures and so forth. So this person, Bahira, serves a rhetorical function of confirming or affirming the prophethood of the young Muhammad. Before he had his encounter with the angel in the cave, in the hills above Mecca, overlooking Mecca. And obviously this is something that is of great value in the biography of Muhammad. And this is why it is reported in all these others as well, receives prominent attention. Now, how is it relevant to the topic of this channel, which is the variant Quran, focused on the transmission of the Quran and the delivery of the Quran? And this goes back to the question of Valentine, who appears to be familiar with this book. He says, what kind of impact could this legend have had on the development of the Islamic tradition, in your opinion? Now, I actually don't know if Valentine is familiar with the entirety of the historical account as it appears in the Syriac and Arabic traditions. But when we look into Barbara Ragama's book, and if you read the account itself in translation, what you find is that not only is there the detail that is related in the biography of Muhammad that I just read to you, but there are other features of the story that appear there. Now, when these things were written, are going to be very relevant to what we do with them. Are they contemporaneous, or are they later recensions? Are there things added to them, and so forth? But in the story of Bahira, as it appears in the Syriac tradition, there are some other features. And the first prominent one is that it, as I mentioned in my response to Valentine, is that Bahira had made a trip toward Syria, and along the way he stopped by Mount Sinai, and I presume that he meant Mount Sinai, the area of St. Catherine's Monastery, which is on the Sinai Peninsula, which I don't believe is the actual Mount Sinai. I believe the actual Mount Sinai is in northern Arabia, what is inside what is today Saudi Arabia. But be that as it may, in the account, he went to this monastery, he stayed there, and after the evening of spending time socializing with the other monastics there, he was told that he could not go out at night and to go up on the mountain, but he sneaks out and he goes up to the top of the mountain in pursuit of a vision, and a vision is granted to him which looks very much like the visions of Ezekiel and Daniel and of John in Revelation, in the sense that this vision involves the stirring up of the seas by the four winds. It involves the appearance of a number of beasts in sequence who are terrifying and have obvious symbolic value. It involves an angel interpreting for Bahira what the meaning of all these things is, which is all very much the pattern of what we saw happening in, for example, Daniel chapter 7. Now, Daniel 7 is very important to the it is tremendously important when it comes to the understanding of Christology and who Messiah was to be. And Jesus himself spoke the words of Daniel chapter 7:13 when he stood before Caiaphas, the high priest, and was asked who he was, and he answered with these words of that. So I want to just take you through, and this is kind of an involved video, but And whether it's actually relevant or if this is a later myth that is developed to serve one narrative or the other, those are things that we'll think about and continue to think about, and I'm not going to take a strong position, but keep that in mind, that we don't necessarily know that this story is true or that it originated around the time of the lifetime of Muhammad. All right, so first thing we're going to do is take a look at Daniel chapter 7. And what happens in Daniel chapter 7 is he had a dream. Daniel in exile. Remember, Daniel was taken to exile to Babylon. He was, Nebuchadnezzar came actually in the first year of his reign, or possibly before he took the throne. I think it seems that Nebuchadnezzar might have been out on expedition and besieging Jerusalem before he actually took the throne. But it was right there around that time. He besieged Jerusalem. He carried off much of Jerusalem in exile to Babylon. He took from among the exiles some young men, 4 young men, Daniel and his 3 friends, into his own service because of the aptitude and the high level of learning and promise that they showed. And Daniel wound up serving in the court, high levels in the court, over the succession of multiple kings. So this dream of Daniel occurs in the first year of Belshazzar, the king of Babylon. And he says, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying in his bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. So in the vision that he had that night, he saw a succession of 4 beasts. The first was like a lion, had the wings of an eagle. The wings were torn off. Daniel is seeing this in his vision. So that it stood on 2 feet like a man, and the heart of a man was given to it. Then there came a second beast, which looked like a bear, and it raised up on one of its sides. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, "Get up and eat your fill of flesh." After that, I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard, and on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. That's number 3. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. As while I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. And at this point, there is a transition in the text. He says in verse 9, "As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze." Now, this is one of the few places in the Bible where someone sees the Ancient of Days. It is in a vision, but sees the Ancient of Days. The Ancient of Days is God. Daniel, Ezekiel, and then John the disciple in his vision in Revelation. So it's worth noting this is a very remarkable and unusual incident. All right, verse 10, "A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 had stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened." Verse 11, "Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority and were allowed to live for a period of time." Now we are at verse 13, which, as I mentioned, is the verse that is quoted by Jesus when he is standing 600 years later before Caiaphas, the high priest. Verse 13 says, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. So just for context, there is a whole lot to talk about and unpack there, and my purpose here is not to go into a thorough discussion of the Son of Man vision, its meaning, or any such, but to place a context around what we are looking at in the Bahira legend. So toward the context, just so you know what the Son of Man vision is, we can turn to Matthew chapter 26, verses 63 and following. Jesus is before the Sanhedrin. This is shortly before, this is his trial before he is crucified. The high priest said to him, this is the high priest Caiaphas, said to him, I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus says, literally, I believe he says, you have said it, which is a way of saying, you got the picture, you got the message. In this translation, it says, yes, it is as you say, Jesus replied. But I say to all of you, in the future you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. So Jesus was making a reference to Daniel chapter 7, verse 13, where the one like a son of man, he uses the term son of man, coming on the clouds of heaven. He says, you will see me coming on the clouds of heaven, and you also see me sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One. And at the right hand of the throne of God is not a place for a human. So this is the reason that in verse 65, the high priest tore his clothes and said, he has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? He is worthy of death, they answered. Then they spit in his face and struck him with their fists. Others slapped him and said, prophesy to us, Christ, who hit you? So again, there's much more reference. Jesus refers to himself as Son of Man in this context many, many times throughout the New Testament. And if you look at chapter 1 of Revelation, which I encourage you doing, you're going to see a further affirmation of this context. All right, so we're coming back now to the legend of Bahira the monk. And when we look at it, we see a vision that he is reported to have received when he goes up the mountain at Mount Sinai. He gets this vision, and he sees a series of beasts. It says he saw the four winds of the sky stirring up each other. Now I'm reading from Barbara Ragama's book. I saw a white beast coming on the wind of the south, and it ate the east and the west and the south and the north and the sea, and it settled in the desert. On its head were 12 horns, and I said to the angel, what is this, my Lord? And he said to me, this is the kingdom of the Ishmaelites. Okay. So this is the first point, and we're going to go through, I'm sorry if this is kind of involved, but this is, obviously we're dealing with some substance here. It's one of the things that is different about the Bahira legend and the Daniel chapter 7 and the other ones. For example, in Daniel 7, Daniel says that he was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there and asked him the true meaning of all this. And so he gave Daniel the interpretation of all this. But the one thing that he does not do is he does not identify any of the kingdoms by name. Does not identify any of the kingdoms by name. And that is typical of all three of the, with one or two small exceptions where Greece is mentioned actually in Daniel chapter 8 and elsewhere. But in this particular case, these visions with the appearance of the beasts, actually in Revelation there's mention of Babylon, although it's possibly in some larger symbolic sense. But usually, and certainly in this case, there's not an identification of the beasts with a given kingdom. And so when we look at the Bahira legend, one thing that stands out to me at least is that it is specifically identified by name, Kingdom of the Ishmaelites. And then there was a second, a black beast on the wind of the north, and it ate the east and the west and the south and the north and the sea, and it settled in the land of Babel. And on its head were 7 horns, and I said to the angel, "What is this, my Lord?" And he said to me, "This is the kingdom of the sons of Hashim, son of Muhammad." So again, you have a specific identification by name. This is unusual in these type of accounts, at least from a biblical perspective. So just at this point where we are, we have a report of Bahira, a monk who is not reported to be a prophet. He goes on a trip to Syria, and along the way he goes to the Sinai Peninsula, which, by the way, is not really on the way to Syria. It's kind of out of the way, and very much out of the way, because he's living north, and he would have gone south for this. So he goes up on the mountain. He gets this vision, a remarkable vision. Remember how remarkable this is for anyone to have a vision of of God on the throne. And actually, Bahira does not see God on the throne. It says that he saw a great cross that gave light to the whole creation. And in brilliance, it surpassed the sun, which is different. None of the other visions have that. It seems a little bit unusual. You can imagine the image of a cross. But remember, this is 600 years after Jesus, whereas the vision of Daniel was 600 years before. And the vision of John was about 90 AD, about 60 years after the crucifixion, and so something like that. So that is another thing that's unusual in this case. Okay, so the identification of that. And then it goes through a series of other beasts. And then after that, I saw a bull coming in great calm and humility on the wind of the south, and on its head were 5 horns, and it ate the 4 quarters of the world, and it settled in Ashur. And I said to the angel, "What is this bull, my Lord?" And he said to me, "This is the kingdom of Mahdi, son of Fatima. And as the bull is calm and humble and peaceful, likewise his kingdom will be more humble and peaceful than all the kingdoms. All the tribes of the sons of Ishmael await him, and with him the kingdom of the Arabs will end." So Mahdi is a messianic figure in Muslim apocalyptic literature, and so I'm not an expert in apocalyptic literature, although David Cook, my advisor, certainly is, and I talked to him about this yesterday as I was kind of thinking about doing this video. Stopping right there, actually what David said is that the Bahira legend appears to be of 9th century origin. That would be the 800s, and so it is later. That is something that is later, which aligns with much of this. As he goes on in this, you see further identification of the various beasts, which you have a panther, you have a lion, a yearling goat, and a great dragon, and all these things. Much more detailed and exotic, I would say, creatures than you see in the other ones that I have already mentioned to you in the Bible. And again, explicit identification of these things with various people. This is the seed of Joktan, who are the people from Qatar. The mightiest Mahdi, the son of Aisha, is his name. The sons of Hagar, and so forth. And so I don't need to go too far into the detail of this because we still have not yet come to the thing that is the point relevant here. But Bahira, so he sees this vision. It seems to confirm and foretell all these things relating to Muhammad and the Ishmaelites and so forth. And then after this, the legend tells about what I have read to you about Bahira meeting Muhammad and actually sitting down with him and talking with him and telling this young Muhammad that he had seen his great future and that he was going to be this amazing person and so forth. But what comes next is the thing that's interesting here, is Muhammad says to him, Yeah, here we go. On page 279, then Muhammad said to Mar Sergius, everything you ask will be for you, but how will they... Oh, and Muhammad says to him after Bahira tells him all these things about Muhammad's future, Muhammad says, great, basically, what can I do for you? And Bahira asks, in this case, he tells about all the Christian monks who are living, and he says, we're people of peace and piety and so forth. And as you come into your kingdom, basically, please don't harm the Christian monks. Leave us to be and let us go our way in peace. And so Muhammad responds to him, everything you ask will be for you. But then Muhammad asks Bahira this question, how will they believe in me not knowing a book? And so Bahira answers him, I will teach you everything. And so this legend continues to go and report that Bahira tells him that he will teach Muhammad at night, the Quran basically is the implication, and that Muhammad will go during the daytime and represent it as his own revelation. Okay, so now you can see how impactful the rest of that legend, which is obviously not reported in the Sirah that I showed you, the Muslim versions of the Sirah, and probably not surprisingly, because in fact, and now we get to some of my opinion about this, in fact, this serves an apologetic and polemic function against Islam and against the prophethood of Muhammad, because it makes Bahira really the originator of the Quran. The fact of its probable late origin is, it seems evident to me that this is likely a crafted narrative. It's likely something that serves the purpose of undermining Muhammad as a prophet. The interesting thing about it is that it, at the same time, affirms him as prophet in a very dramatic way, as having come from God, and through the vision. I mean, why did Bahira have to even have the vision in the first place to recognize Muhammad as a prophet? And so those two things existing side by side in this account are very interesting. But the likely imposition or the growth of this legend into something that serves the interests of those wishing to discount Muhammad is likely, as well as possibly the growth of the narrative of Bahira in the first place. Now, is there a historical kernel in this? Did Bahira actually exist? Did he actually have an encounter with Muhammad in which he affirmed him or spoke of his, or saw that he was indeed going to be a prophet to the Ishmaelites and so forth? I don't know. We don't know. It exists in the biography. And by the way, it is not the only instance in the biography. If you read through it, you're going to find several other places where there are encounters of Muhammad with Christian people and Christian monks. The other one is Waraka, a Christian who was close to Muhammad and was one of the first converts to Islam. So there's these things that pop up in the biography that lend a certain authority to Muhammad in the mouths and testimony and witnesses of Christians who are around him at the time. And obviously this serves an important role and important function. All right, so we've been through a lot today. I'm sorry, this video has gone quite long, but I wanted to bring it around full circle and answer that great question. I just think it's a sort of a dive into some of the historical context of these things. We haven't dealt with manuscripts at all today, but we have dealt with some of the things related to the delivery and transmission of the Quran. I am not expressing to you any opinion about them. I'm just making you aware of some of the historical material and one particular episode that exists in the biography of Muhammad and in some of the surrounding materials that were contemporaneous or shortly thereafter that we have in the historical record. So I hope it's been interesting to you, and thank you very much for watching. My own interest in this, I hope, is evident that I find this stuff fascinating, and there's so much to look through and think about, and I hope you enjoy going along this journey with me in this YouTube classroom as we talk about this stuff. I will link at the bottom the Ragama book and the Guillaume book, and maybe a couple of these others if you're interested in picking them up for yourself and doing some more reading. Meanwhile, thank you very much for watching, and wherever you are in the world, I hope you're doing well. We will talk to you again very soon. Thank you. Bye.